Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. It is so good to see all of y'all here for the second annual Bell Hooks Symposium at Oklahoma. We can say annual now because we done did the second one. And we are so proud to do this. Bell Hooks was a legend. She is a hero, an inspiration, a mentor, a friend, a teacher, a guidepost for so many of us. And at Uncle Bobbie's, we had discussed doing a symposium for Bell Hooks even before her passing. But after her passing, we knew that it was something that we had to do, because the last thing that we can allow to happen in our community is for our heroes, our leaders, our teachers, our organizers, our elders to be forgotten. And so that's what we're here for. And every year, as long as Uncle Bobbie's is open, we're gonna do a Bell Hooks Symposium. And this year, we brought together, for me, literally, the best team of people, the best crew of people I could imagine to talk about Bell Hooks' legacy in this moment in history. I couldn't be more excited to introduce, to welcome these extraordinary guests who are gonna come out onto the stage right now. And I'm gonna introduce them. We have the legendary Dr. Brittney Cooper of Princeton University. We have Keeanga Yamahtta-Taylor from Princeton University. We have the legendary Tarana Burke all the way from the BS. And we have Princeton University's and MSNBC's Eddie S. Glaude Jr., Dr. Eddie S. Glaude Jr. Please give them a round of applause. Our beloved brother, colleague, comrade, friend, Keeanga Yamahtta-Taylor, had an emergency and was unable to attend at the very last minute. He sends his love, his regards, and he will join us at the next possible symposium. So we send our love to him and his. I want to thank y'all again. I'm so excited to have y'all here. We're going to do just some housekeeping. I'm going to talk to them for a bit, and then there is going to be time for questions. So as you're listening carefully, think about what the panelists are saying, but also if there are things you want to think about and talk about related to this topic, please jump on in. The first question I want to ask y'all, Brittney, you gonna write? We're gonna pass. Oh, we're gonna pass? Okay, all right, cool. The first question for me is a really simple one. For you, both personally and or professionally, who was Bell Hooks?
Hey, y'all. Hey! You know, I mean, there's so many things that I could say, and I don't know that it can be distilled to a sound bite. I would say that my first encounter with Bell Hooks is as an undergraduate who did not yet identify as a feminist. And one of my good friends was like, we gotta go see Bell Hooks. She's on campus. And I was like, who is that? And she said, she talks real crazy, girl. So we like went to but that friend and that encounter was really sowing the seeds of my becoming a feminist, and it would take a few more years for me to actually, go on that journey, which basically means that I needed to read, which I had not done. And then when I started reading, I mean, Bell Hooks is a wonderful thinker to think with, and I believe that I started with feminist theory from margin to center in a graduate school seminar. And I feel like I've had varying relationships to Bell's work over the years. I was chatting with Eddie Glaude backstage and saying, perhaps my most controversial engagement was in 2014 when Bell Hooks called Beyonce a terrorist. And I was very angry about that. And we had a blog that we actively published on at the time. And so, like a good young person without a lot to lose, I had a lot to say. Pissed off some folks, but felt very righteous in my critique. And what I'm most thankful for is that many years later, when I published my book of essays, Eloquent Rage, my good friend Darnell Moore, who was good friends with Belle, let me know that he passed her a copy, and I was like, oh my God. Now, I'm very complimentary of her in this book because, quite frankly, you cannot be a public intellectual, a pop culture critic, a radical Black feminist thinker in this era without we're in the house that Belle built. I think that is the clearest way to say it. And very thankfully, she just told him she liked it. And that's all that I ever needed to hear. Yeah.
I'll say a couple of things. One, I didn't know Belle personally, but I also know that she read my first book, From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, and also liked it, So, but there are two things that I think are important for me. There are many things, but two things that stand out. One is her attention to class and class politics and the way that the importance of talking about the way that class shapes intraracial relations between Black people in ways that I think are often ignored. And that is certainly a part of her writing, her public writing in particular, that I think is important, and certainly I try to follow in doing so. And that is the second point. I think that one of the most important things about Bell Hooks, and the reason why so many of us people are aware and know about her work, is that she wrote for a broad public and did not see her ideas, her queries, her examination of things as intended to be walled off for a scholarly audience. And what that meant is that she was actually trying to influence something and do something in the world, and not just engage in debates for debate's sake. And I think that all of us emulate that, and has certainly benefited from that, and understand the importance to politically engage with the public, because that is how things actually change. And that isn't to denigrate the scholarly interventions and that type of practice, which has its own importance. But I think that for a long time, people have looked at folks that write for the public and towards the public as somehow maybe less rigorous than those who are writing for a much narrower audience. And I think Bell Hooks is certainly part of a trend that rejects that idea, and that says that, in many ways, there is importance and impact in writing in ways that ordinary people, everyday people can read, absorb, and then argue and debate about those ideas. So I think that, to me, stands out as one of the most important aspects of her legacy.
It's a great place for me to pick up, because as the person who introduced me to Bell Hooks was my mother, who is not a formal scholar, but she introduced me to every Black feminist that I know. And and then after my mother, I, for some reason, have all of these scholars in my life. It was just my way of getting, I guess, a PhD by osmosis. I don't know why I know all y'all academics. But my smarty art friend then bolstered my understanding of who she was and why she was important. And I also didn't identify as a feminist early on until Imani got me together, Perry, of course. And really my love of bell hooks was around her understanding of love was what made me really, having a definition was so important to me. And running with that definition and being able to say it over and over again, and in my interactions with, romantic interactions and community interactions, using that as from a place of organizing inside the Black community was really, really, really important to me, because it's hard work, and being able to say to the people I'm working with that I love y'all, and this is what love looks like, even when it's hard, was really important. So from a different perspective, because it's difficult when you are up and inside of the community every day and saying, I'm doing this because I love Black people, and you're talking to Black people and saying, I love you, and they're like, do you? What does that mean? And you're like, well, it means, So to your point, I think that she was so important for making us talk about things that we were not talking about from that perspective, right? Let's say love. We always water that down and make it mean something lesser. And like, love is not hard, hope is not hard. Those things are very difficult. And those are the basis for how we build up our community, how we stick together, how we show up for each other. And so that's why she's always been important to me.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Marc and Uncle Bobbie's for doing this. This is always a wonderful event. I want to thank the folks who put the lights on and set up the chairs, the folks who are going to break down the chairs. So thank you all for doing everything that you do. I was introduced to bell hooks at the height of what we might describe as kind of Black studies, right, in the 80s and 90s. It was her insistence on tracking imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, right, as an analytic. In the early work, she would describe it as a politic of domination, as a way of thinking that was really important. I remember, I can't go into the details of the story, but I remember being in an apartment in Paul Gilroy in England with Isaac Julian and others, and Bell asking some very interesting questions of my personal life. As she was probing, and that question actually revealed the way in which she wanted to keep track of structures, interpersonal relationships, and interiority all at once. Right? How do we keep track of structures that reproduce domination? How do we understand the way those structures distort our relationships to each other? And how then do they disfigure our self-conception? The way she renders Black self-determination as a form of self-love. It's just brilliant, right? And so I've always come to bell hooks as an intellectual, as a person who's grappling with ideas at the level of form, representing those ideas in a way that was accessible by her mother, by her brother, by the folk that she came from Kentucky. You know what I mean? So there's that. And then there's this kind of second point. I should say too, it's really dope to see, I don't know, remember that book between her and Cornel West, Breaking Bread? And the way in which she responded to Cornel's imagining of the crisis of the Black intellectual, right? And to read, I teach that essay to this day in my graduate course, the way we can track that concern from John Hope Franklin to Cornell, to Bell's response, to Hortense Spiller's response, right? And the way in which she just holds him to account for this very kind of gendered masculinist understanding of what it means to engage in a kind of public intellectual work, and how she did it with a kind of bold irreverence, a kind of provocation aimed at getting us to think, which leads me to my last point. It's something that I will always take from her, even when she's critical of me, because she told me I knew behind with democracy and Black. She said she forgot my name on purpose. Exactly what she was doing, because I didn't cite it for something. It wasn't plagiarism, I just didn't cite it.
She didn't cite anybody.
Exactly. That citational practice is interesting. But there's a concept that I live by. There's a concept I live by called critical vigilance. She insists on paying attention to, keeping track of the shifting material conditions of our lives, the shifting conditions under which we be together, right? And so there's a kind of critical vigilance that allows her to be supple, nuanced, fluid, not rigid, ideologically rigid, but a kind of fluid thinker that allowed her to think across these moments. And hopefully that has kind of deposited itself in the way in which I approach ideas.
Eddie said something that's important. All of you did, and they connect, right? The point that Eddie made at one point was about people coming of awareness to bell hooks at the height of sort of Black studies, but also there was a moment, right, as Black studies is emerging in the public eye. There's a long tradition of Black study and Black studies. That there's also the Black public intellectual that comes up. And from the OJ trial, particularly the OJ trial, we could talk about some other things that happened as well, Rodney King, etc. But by the time we get to the OJ Simpson trial, people are looking to Black intellectuals for answers. And they often went to Cornel West. They often went to bell hooks. They went to Henry Louis Gates, for sure. In fact, Henry Louis Gates often was the decider of who they were going to go to. And often, though, and Tricia Rose as well. And often when we talk about the genealogy, though, of Black public intellectuals, even when we think about Black public intellectuals, we often write bell hooks out of that. And we often marginalize even Tricia Rose in that conversation. And so I guess part of what I want you all to help me think about is sort of, how does that kind of thing happen, right? How do we end up in a world where when we say Black intellectual, we mean men? And why do we continue to play into that? And let me start with Brittney, just because you are one of the more visible Black public intellectuals, and certainly Black woman public intellectual around.
I mean, and also this was the driving question of my first book.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that too. Which I read.
Yeah, look, that book ends with Breaking Bread. It ends with the discussion of bell hooks and breaking bread, in part because she answers the question. She says that it is because we have always treated women as having all body and no mind. And so so I kept on wondering how I would write this book that for me was about the tradition of Black women who made bell hooks possible. Mariah Stewart, and Anna Julia Cooper, and Ida B. Wells, and all of the civil rights era women, right? And June Jordan, Audre Lorde, and Angela Davis, who are her peers and contemporaries writing. But, I think that part of the thing is that we don't trust Black women to be thinkers. And one of the things that bell hooks is, talks about, so in her book, Talking Back, which is one of my favorite books, she talks about the issue of theory and what do we do about theory. So she takes on this question about what does it mean to write in an accessible way. And one of the things she says is that a lot of people doing theory are basically doing convoluted writing that nobody can access, and then being super pleased with themselves because they call it theory. And that the Academy rewards this, and that it's all about setting up this hierarchy. And she's interesting because she also disagrees with the Black feminist scholars at that time, folks like Barbara Christian, who were saying, well, we do theorize, but we theorize in all these other ways. And bell hooks says the problem is not our capacity for abstraction. We have the capacity for abstraction, right, as Black people. The problem is that we then think that because we're abstract, that we then have to turn that into something esoteric that masses of people cannot understand. Right. And so she has this commitment, but if you think about bell hooks as an academic, many of us on the stage are academics, then part of what happens is that so much of how we produce radical Black intellectual work, whether in Black studies, whether in Black feminist thought, has quite frankly been co-opted by the dictates of the academy. And so many of us have been asked to play the games of the academy. And one of the things I appreciate about bell hooks is that she said, look, be in the academy. It is a site of radical practice if you make it so, but don't get caught up in the academy being the only place from which radical thinking and theorizing can occur.
I'll just say one thing about the context that Marc is talking about, the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and you know, the perception, it's not a perception, the Black men are seen as the kind of intellectual, public intellectual force in Black communities. And, you know, the obvious answer is sexism, right? But I think also at this time, where, you know, the Million Man March is in 96, 95?
October 95.
You know, there's this public discussion really about the emasculation of Black men in ways that completely marginalize the experiences of Black women, which of course is how we get to the politics of Black feminism in the first place, as a not just as a unit of analysis, which in some ways the pivot towards the academy in the 1980s began to reduce Black feminism too, but in its, you know, original iteration as a radical social movement around the needs of Black women in the mid to late 1960s, it also emerged during this time of great consternation about the condition of Black men. And so I think that, you know, in these discussions, the insights, the experiences of Black women have been marginalized. And so one of the things that I wrote about in my book on Black Lives Matter was in many ways the tragedy of the emergence of Black women as intellectual leaders and political leaders comes about in this new iteration of Black struggle around Black Lives Matter, because so many Black men have been disappeared from Black communities, either through incarceration, through different manifestations of violence of the state. And that is the context within which Black women as political leaders, as theorists around the strategy and tactics of Black social movements take on new prominence. And, you know, I think that's also the context within which we get the resurgence of interest and around the work of bell hooks, around the work of Angela Davis, around Audre Lorde. If you think about, you know, all of the books in the 1960s about the number of Black men who participate in movements, and there is not a single biography of Angela Davis, right, who has one of the most important political through lines, not just in the 1960s, but the activism of her parents in the 1930s, her own political activism in the 1960s, and the continuation of that into the 1980s and 1990s, and now the prominence of the ideas of police and prison abolition. And so, you know, I think that we have to think about the social, the wider social and political context that has led to this marginalization, and the tragedy that has created the space for the emergence of Black women's political leadership in this particular moment?
That's what I wanted to, I'm glad you said that, because we have on stage one of the vanguard of Black political leadership, and I would say cultural leadership. I'm talking about Tarana Burke. The moment that Keeanga just spoke to, the 90s, where people are worried about the conspiracy to destroy Black boys, or kill Black boys in the book's called. There's no third world press, y'all should check it out. To talk about the emasculation of Black men, atonement for Black male problems, etc. All this stuff is happening against the backdrop of a feminist movement that's now being marginalized because of that. But when I think about now, I'm thinking about similar conversations. Yeah. They're not happening just in bookstores, they're happening on YouTube. I mean, YouTube is a very interesting place. Cesspool's a great word, that's a better word. And it really is. And when you go to YouTube, you can hear people like Kevin Samuels.
R.I.P.
I love you, Brittney. She said, Kevin was terrible to Brittney. I'll just say that. He was absolutely terrible to Brittney. And you saying, even you saying R.I.P. is the Lord working through you right now. Honestly, he was
Except we don't know what that P stands for.
So Tarana, if you have this manosphere, you have this whole world of people who are talking about Black manhood, Black mass, all this stuff, and then at the same time, you were actually out in the world talking about harm that is being committed and perpetrated against Black women and girls. At that same time, you're trying to animate a movement to talk about sexual violence, to talk about healing, wholeness, and you're often framed as somebody who's attacking Black men, often in the same way that Bell Hooks was. Talk to me first of all how you make sense of this moment, how you respond to it, how you feel about it, yeah.
So part of why my heart was racing while you were just talking is because, one, I'm a student of the civil rights movement, right? And my training and background comes from that movement. And so I was, one, thinking about how that, the repetition of that from civil rights, Black power, and that movement, the women that held those movements up, that also, there's no biography of Diane Nash. Yes. There's no, right? And who was the heartbeat of the strategies around, really, right? Absolutely terrible. So I think about the women who I know, who we know, that were also holding up the men in those movements who were having to deal with and tuck away what was happening to Black women at the same time, very much cyclical. We know also in the 70s, similar thing, right? It was terrible violence against women. I think people who don't understand the emergence of the movement to end sexual violence, which happens in the end of the 60s and the 70s by Black women, right? So we have all of this, like, I don't want to get into a history lesson, but like, after 1968, when Dr. King is killed in 68, we have all the uprisings, we always see the footage of the riots and things like that, and then Black Power movement started, and we hear about Black Panthers, all the rest of that kind of stuff, and we don't hear about the emergence of the movement to end sexual violence that is held up by Black and Latino women across the country. First Rape Crisis Centers, all of that were community-led programs of women trying to stop violence against other women that was happening, the rampant sexual violence that's happening inside of our communities. That's Black women. Yep. So many people are like, the Me Too movement started, not even close. We're talking about 50 years, 60 years of work on the backs of Black women that started in places like Oakland and DC and in the South, right? And so, again, those are Black women who were begging and pleading, similar to the way we're doing now, for support from brothers saying, we're dying, right? We're being killed. So, similar to now then, police were on our necks, not just of Black men, of Black women. And this is the thing that always really is so hard for me to understand why we can't see. If we know that Black people, I'm just gonna talk Black for a second, we all, right? If we know that Black people have a history of having adverse interactions with law enforcement. Black people have a history of having adverse interactions with law enforcement in this country. That is, however you identify across the gender spectrum. The number one complaint against police in this country is police brutality. The number two is sexual violence. So that means we know that men, I'm gonna be gender for 1 second, men and women both suffer police brutality in this country. Number one complaint, but it's women, number two, by and large, who are sexually assaulted by police. And if Black people have adverse interactions with law enforcement, who you think is getting the brunt of number two? It's Black women. But when you hear about the fight against police brutality, when you hear Black Lives Matter, you think men. So when you see a Black woman who comes out and says, I'm fighting against police brutality, my work in Selma, where this work started, was against police brutality. First, we were marching in the street. We were organizing against law enforcement in Selma. Y'all can go Google this. We organized in 2000 to get the first Black mayor of Selma, Alabama. The same mayor who was mayor in 1965 in Selma was still mayor in 2000. Mayor Joe Smitherman. He was corrupt. Everybody was corrupt from the top to the bottom. His chief of police, I'm gonna tell a long story, I'm sorry. The point is, what's happening now is the same, it's cyclical. It's the same thing that keeps happening. And Black women are always the ones who are coming to the rescue. Y'all know this already, right? Always coming to the rescue of everybody else, but nobody coming to the rescue of us. What's happening on YouTube, to your point, I saw somebody online call it the incelification. The incelification of our men, our boys. Did y'all hear about this little Black girl who was machete? Yeah, in London, a little Black girl who was killed by machete. The part of this issue is we have so much access to bad information. From the girl who was hit in the head with the brick, to it's just really, really hard. When I say that my work is about all of us, people can't hear that. Because when a Black woman opens her mouth to tell her story, to talk about what's happening, what people, and I'm not saying Black men, what people, Black people will hear is somebody trying to take down a Black man instead of a Black woman trying to save her life. And that's a problem.
Eddie, what role do we as Black male scholars, and relatively prominent Black male scholars in particular, do to reinforce these norms? What do we do to normalize the idea that men should be our primary unit of analysis, that the urgency that we should be feeling, even if we say Black people, tacitly really mean Black men? Are there ways that we reinforce that either through what we do or through what we don't do?
Yes. I think, I mean, whether you...
It wasn't a great question, but I just trusted him.
No, so whether you're committed to patriarchy or not, you're going to benefit from it, right? And so even as you engage in the critique of it, right? Even as you try to inhabit a feminist space, you end up reproducing, right, in so many ways, the very things that we've been talking about, right? And I think it's important. I mean, Bell actually tries to get at this in her 2004 book, The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love. And you know, I'm also a Baldwin scholar, right? And so what Jimmy's trying to do is to say, if we're ever going to get at this, we're going to have to deconstruct the very idea of what we mean by masculinity. Right? And if your notion of man, the notion of manhood, is predicated upon, right, the subordination of women, right? Then we're never going to get out of this, right? And so there's this, when you read Baldwin on male prisons, or you read Baldwin, right, in Freaks and those sorts of essays, you see him actually being more nuanced than he actually is when he's actually speaking with, especially when Audre Lorde handed him his ass. But if you ever see the video, I mean, Audre Lorde hands in his behind in a really interesting sort of way. But the idea, though, is I think what Bell is trying to do in that 2004 book is to open up space for Black men to imagine themselves differently, to inhabit what it means to be a man differently, right? And I think that book, I was just rereading it for this panel just today, is actually underread.
Yes.
It's not read in the way that it should be read, because she's actually trying to make a serious intervention on the other side of the calculation, or the other side of the equation, if that makes sense.
I sometimes hear Bell Hooks and the Will to Change, Brittney, when I read Eloquent Rage, in particular. Talk to me, because you help us write, and you've been doing this for a long time, write and thinking about love, relationships, dating, through these lenses. How does Bell Hooks help us think about, I don't want to say we use crisis so much. How does Bell Hooks help us think about how current notions of masculinity are unhealthy for everybody, and how they might undermine the capacity to build the kind of communities we want?
You know, look, part of the thing, so it's both the will to change and also we grow cool, right? You know, this kind of, the thing that is always interesting to me when I read Bell is that it's clear to me that she loves Black men. And loves them in every way, and in many ways long to have a particular kind of partnership. And the thing that I find so interesting is that when Black women say we love Black men, y'all don't believe us, right? You hear the call for the kind of rigorous love that we're talking about, which says, show up, heal, do your work as an assault, right? And you know, so Bell is the prototype for at least giving us a language, you know, to try to think about what is actually happening with Black men. I mean, and I don't just like to think about the masculinity stuff. When I say love Black men, I mean an essay like Penis Passion. Bell was outrageous. Like, it cannot be said that this woman, well, she was, right? But it cannot be said that this woman did not love brothers, right? Did not love the, you know. Right? And at the same time, the thing that I worry about, so, I was trying to think about the full, you know, I was like, child, there's still some books in the corpus that I haven't read. It's 30 books, so I was sitting and thinking, I gotta teach a class so that I can read all 30 books. But what Hooks has allowed me to do in my own work around this, the question that I always want to ask Black men, which is a question that I think I hear when I read Love, and I hear Bell struggling with like the kind of power issues that cause men to, you know, she like has this section where she's talking about men's relationship with their mothers and the way that they, you know, the power struggle there and the kind of toxicity that emerges. And she doesn't do a deep dive in that particular moment, but she sort of, you know, kind of walks us up to this. And it occurs to me as I read her, like, I just want to ask brothers, why are y'all so mad with us? Yeah. Like, what is it about Black women? This is the question with Eloquent Rage. What is it about Black women that makes you so angry, right? So resentful? Because when you are in the manosphere and you hear the level of rhetoric that goes on there, you have these brothers who are so disaffected, so angry, so, but it's a blinding rage towards Black women, not towards white men, not towards capitalism, right? Not towards white women. What are you saying? Not even always towards other brothers, right? Just towards us. And I find myself scratching my head about this. And, you know, and so Bell says over and over again, sexism, you know, feminism is a movement to end sexist oppression in all its forms. And she becomes very clear that anybody can participate in those movements and that is not gender specific. And yet somehow, when I listen to brothers, when I became a feminist, part of the reason that I became a feminist is because I thought, this is an analytic that frees everybody. And what I mean by that, I tell people all the time, like, patriarchy kills men too, right? My father was an abuser, was a terrible abuser of my mother. And then later, though, my father was killed defending his girlfriend from a different violent man. Because patriarchy kills men too. So the minute he decided to be honorable in defense of a different woman, then he ends up dead in the process. Right? None of us benefits from these kind of shows of politics of domination, right? But in the end, I think that part of the challenge we have that we don't want to be honest about is that, and this is the thing, I'm generally hopeful, and genuinely hopeful, but I'm losing hope in brothers. And it's not because I don't believe in brothers, and it's not because I haven't sacrificed a lot of skin in the game to say that I believe in brothers. But some days I feel hopeless in part because I don't think that Black men in the aggregate want freedom. I think they want power. And I think that what happens when they encounter Black feminists in particular, particularly if they're Black feminists in the bell hooks tradition, which say white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, what we keep saying is that white people's power is not our definition of freedom. That's right. And for so many Black men, the biggest resentment of their life is not all that this system has taken from all of us. It is that the system that white men enjoy has taken their specific ability as men to participate. And that is the thing that they are most focused on regaining. And part of what they need in order to regain it is for all of us to just shut the fuck up. They need Black women to just shut up and let them be dominant. And the fact that we won't do it, and that we won't play white girl games with them, and that we won't just sit down and say that all is well with my king and whatever the hell. Really makes it feel some type of way. And the challenge that we have now is that none of that sentiment is new, right? Black women, look, because I wanted to add to the chorus of Black women who don't have biographies. Keeanga Cooper does not have a critical biography, okay? We could continue, but Black women, since the time that Black women have been freely speaking in the public, have been talking about dudes and their shenanigans. But the challenge that we have right now is that now, Marc, the other thing that Belle's work does is she keeps on pointing us to the emotional life of struggle, right? Love and all of the way love threads her entire body of work keeps pointing us to the emotional life of struggle. And the problem is that now all these dudes can find each other online and get in an emotional circle jerk with each other and tell you that your bullshit is actually the truth, then it becomes much harder for us to fight back against that.
New vocabulary words.
Okay, I want to say something real quick. So I acknowledge that all of that is true, and loving Black men is still true. Needing to have family, community. I'm gonna be the sack for a second. Because I love Black. I love Black people. Full stop, right? And I'm sad, if I'm being honest, about watching this happen. I'm really sad, and I'm just as attacked as you are, right? I mean, there's a litany of shit about me. I've had to move all kind of things if I'm being attacked, and it's scary because when white folks attack me, and I shouldn't say this out loud. I already said it. But like when white people were attacking me, I had the whole MAGA thing, and I live in Harlem, so it's like I can see you coming. Because even the white people in Harlem, I know this, whether it's MAGA in Harlem. But when Black men started attacking me, that shit was scary. Because I don't really know who's who. But so that's and and I've talked to Marc about this a lot because I've dedicated my entire life, literally from 14 years old when I started this work. And I come from the blackest family you could possibly, I'm talking about birthday cakes on Malcolm X's birthday, black. So to be told that I don't love black men was devastating to me. So I'm saying that to say, I get the issue, I'm still hopeful for a solution, right? Like, we can't lose black men, right? We can't lose them. We can't. And so I'm like, all right, so they got YouTube and they doing the incelification of it. We up here, we have these kind of community forums and we're talking about bell hooks and how does this translate to a solution? The kind of people who would come to this don't need this, right? These brothers in here, I'm assuming, right, are not the brothers, I hope. And if you are and you came to this, I hope you leave here changed. But I'm assuming the kind of brothers who come here. But like, what do we do? So I'm thinking about my cousins, right, who are on the line a little bit. Who sometimes they celebrate me because I'm their cousin until I say something, they be like, you be on that. And then I have to like, you know, so my next book is called Revolutionary Grace. Because I believe in grace, but I'm not God. So, to put it lightly, right? So I'm like, I'm really struggling with, we can't leave brothers behind, those brothers behind, and we can't sacrifice ourselves, right? When I was organizing, when I was doing deep organizing in the community, that kind of thing, one of the first rules we learned of nonviolence was, I will not violate your dignity, but I will not compromise mine. Second rule is when we make a decision, when I make a decision, it will be to serve everybody, even my enemy. I think about that all the time. I'm not calling brothers my enemy, even though y'all act like it. Correct. But y'all act like it. So I'm talk thinking with y'all. This is sort of a community process. Because I think about this all the time. I know you do, and you know, obviously, because when we are attacked and all that kind of, think about that. I'm looking at these brothers who look at me in my face and calling me all kind of things and making videos about me and saying shit that they're getting wrong, and I'm looking at you actively getting wrong. But I don't know if you've done this. A few times, I don't do it too much anymore. I've engaged some of these brothers who will get in my inbox and say all kind of wild shit to me, and I'll be like, what about this? Blah, 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 I'll go back and forth. And a few times they've been like, oh, you're not bad. You know, and then I'm like, right, you flexing on the whatever, Instagram or whatever. You don't really you don't really know me. You know? And you don't know what I'm trying to do. Like, you think you know a thing. They be like, the white women stole your shit and you just working for the white women. I'm like, shit. Okay, let me back up. I'm getting a little too loose. You don't really understand what's going on. So my point I'm trying to make is, how do we not lose brothers who are on the cusp because they are angry? Last thing I'm gonna say, there is a theory about men of color and sexual violence that is to your point about power, right? Because they say sexual violence is about power and not about sex, right? We've all heard that. And the theory is, to sort of summarize it, is like, if sexual violence is about power, how do we talk about men who don't have power? So for them, it's about the trying to access power. And it's not like trying to dominate over, not trying to exercise their power, but trying to access power. And I think it's sort of in line with what you're saying about black men. They're trying to access power. So it just makes me think about, what do we do to shift understanding of power en masse? I don't have these answers, y'all. I'm just trying to put it out to like think
Brittney,
about it.
go to camp or something.
The thing I want to say about it, Tarana, is that the thing I resent is that in simply saying our truth, that then we have to reaffirm that we love them. It's like, I'm still, it's like, I'm still putting money on your books. I'm still at the protest. I'm still writing the articles. I'm still showing up to the conversation. I'm like you, watching brothers put my picture all over the internet and post videos about me and say terrible things. I mean, my one get back sometimes when they're like, you ugly and fat and we hope you die of a heart attack and you can't get a man. I mean, that happens en masse repeatedly. And when I think about this year alone, I had D.L. Hughley repost something out of context about me. And that was like a couple of months ago. And then one of these other kind of dudes whose name was not worth remembering, right? And I'm like, and I'm still showing up. And so sometimes my one get back is like, they'll be like, you fat, ugly, you can't get a man. And so then I just like call up my man and be like, hey, they said I couldn't get you, but I got you. So what do you think about this here, right? But it's like, but the other thing I'm trying to say is, I remember being in Brooklyn 10 years ago and a dude being so mad that I gently asked him about his gender analysis that he stood up and he threw a cup of water on me in a room where there were brothers, and they didn't do shit. Excuse my language, but they didn't. And then later, the first response from the audience was, I will not stand for this maligning of the black man. And so I want to know, June Jordan said, what is a morally defensible black feminism? Because a morally defensible black feminism does not require me to sign up for my own suicide.
But you heard what I said. I will not violate your dignity,
Look,
but I will not.
they're wonderful principles, and I guess I'm like that, but I'm talking about the emotional labor that we have to do to tell brothers that we don't want to throw them away. And, and I'm like, but don't you see the love of the sisters who are writing the books because we don't want to throw you away? Because we want to live and thrive with you. Why can't they see it? And so when I express a reduction in hope, the thing to know about me and the work is always that I have boundless faith in the ability of people to change. But what I feel like is that we are losing this fight right now because the seductions of capitalism and the problem of disinformation are so gargantuan. And and the thing is, the blood sacrifice that this country wants is for black women to be the ones yelling and screaming into the wind, and there's no compensation for us. There's no return on that investment other than the one brother who won't publicly say, yo, she good, y'all leave her alone, but just be in your inbox like, and I'm like, is that a proper return on your investment though? Right? And not, you shouldn't invest, you should, because maybe he won't be so terrible. Of course you should, and of course I should, but at what point do we get to say, because I feel like so many of these dudes want us to make this sacrifice, want us to do these analyses, want us to show up, want us to take it, and they never want us to name it because the naming it is the betrayal.
That's right.
I'm not saying don't do that, Brittney. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm not saying, I started off by saying, I 100% agree with you, and trust me, I'm tired. I am very tired. I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm trying to figure out I guess what I'm saying, I'm trying to figure out collectively something that allows us to do all of those things. And maybe it's impossible, and maybe it's a miracle that can try to bring some people along. Everybody can't come, right? We know that. I don't want to quote Umar, that's probably dangerous in here. At the risk of that. But I think you said everybody can't come. I mean, I'm not trying to kill little boys in the street corner. But everybody can't come, I get that. It's just, I was just trying to balance my sadness at the fact that everybody can't come. And the possibility that there might be a way for us to keep our dignity intact and struggle through it. And maybe it's just, I just want to express the sadness.
No. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I'm going to pivot just a slight bit, but
Yeah, go ahead.
I want Keeanga and Eddie, if you feel the need to comment on what we just been talking about, feel free to jump in on that as I ask this next question. Because I was thinking about, as you all were talking, I was thinking about Keeanga was thinking about how we get free. How we get free. That's the name of it. The book, not the book, the idea.
The ideas.
Yeah. Which takes us through the Combahee River Collective. And I always think about, as these sisters, these women were sort of imagining what freedom looked like, it certainly was a world free of domination. And they were calling for everything from environmental justice to economic justice. And they were also calling for liberation for people who were dominating them, right? So at the same time, so black women always had to think through what it means to get free and to help people who in their very homes are dominating them, in their lives are dominating. All this stuff is happening. But it's also happening against the backdrop of capitalism. And I don't want to decenter that. So I want you to help us think through just a little bit about all these, how are these battles being waged on a ground that inevitably is going to undermine all of our dignity, that's going to make all of us angry, it's going to put all of us in conditions that make it impossible to have healthy relationships. And to what extent does bell hooks and also a broader feminist movement create space for us to dream about and think about a world that's free of domination, that centers capitalism as one of the key causes of it. And just to be clear, that's not to decenter women's pain, black women's experiences navigating this stuff. I want to pivot on multiple centers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. When I interviewed Demita Frazier and Barbara Smith, her sister Beverly, about the Combahee statement that was published in 1977, they, a lot of what they talked about was their kind of the way that their activism around violence against black women had sort of put them out of the other types of movement and organizing that they were involved in. They made clear that the Combahee Project was not their entry into politics. They had been active around the civil rights movement, active in the anti-war movement. Demita Frazier was around the Black Panther Party in Chicago. But part of what led to their organization of this new group was that no one was taking violence against black women seriously. And this is part of the constellation of issues that they looked at to develop the idea of identity politics. Identity politics wasn't, let's go off and do our own thing and we don't care about what's happening to anyone else. It was really about the right of black women to organize, develop and organize around their own political agenda, the issues that no one else would take seriously. And that also is what the personalist political is about, is that the issues that they were dealing with personally, the humiliation of the welfare office, the issues with intimate partner violence, all of those personal things were political. And political meaning that you actually had to organize and develop an understanding of why this was happening, and then strategy and tactics to deal with it, to respond to it, which made it a political and not just a personal issue. But I think where they end up is important for this discussion and other, the main conversation right now, which is what do we do? How do we change these things that are destroying our relationships, destroying our lives? Because I think, what Tarana and Brittney are speaking to, and that we've all experienced to one degree or another in our lives. And this is the thing about middle class, black people, black academics. You're only a generation away from utter and complete chaos, and that is the difference between the, we talk about what are the difference between the black middle class experience and the white middle class experience. Is that one pivot away from complete and total chaos. The down on the luck uncle who's living in your garage because they can't get it together and your mother is pulling all the brothers, the four brothers in the family along You know, we all have a story.
Like she's telling our business.
And they want to know why. They want to know why do you want that raise? Because we're not just bringing us, we're bringing everybody else with us. If you really wanted to know. But what this really is about is powerlessness, I think. You know, it's not having any power. And we know what happens when people don't have power. They kick down at the person, you know, that they can exercise some power over, right? It's why women who beat their kids are beating their kids, because that is the one place that they have some power. In the tensions that boil over in poor and working class communities that lead to violence within families. And of course it happens elsewhere, but the compression, the sense of being in the pressure cooker, you know, all of that is compounded by a complete and total absence of power and control in one's life. And so politically, for me, I've always thought about the way that struggle and the engagement in struggle is a way that ordinary people, everyday people, are able to get a taste of power in their lives. And it speaks to why, in my opinion, that those struggles have to connect up with a political idea about not just rearranging things as they exist in the way that we think about the current configuration of our society, but that there is a deeper issue, that we live in a society that privileges the exploitation of ordinary people, that privileges the profiting wealth over the well-being of, you know, the majority of the population. How do we come out of a pandemic with billionaires becoming bigger billionaires when we know it was at the expense of ordinary people? And so everything in this society is turned upside down because it is organized in a way to glorify the rich and the powerful, and not just glorify them, but there are poor people because there are rich people. Their wealth is derived from the theft of our wages, the theft of the salaries. They are rich because other people are poor. And that is the sign of a sick and distorted society. And so we shouldn't be surprised then, in a society that also privileges violence, we give the Pentagon $1 trillion a year to do whatever the hell they want to do with it, right? So our society that privileges violence, that privileges war, that gives money to cops and not housing, that gives money to prisons and not to stop people from evicting. And then we wonder why there's violence between ordinary people. And that's all that our society teaches. That's why King said, right, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world was the United States government, and they had no right to tell black people in the streets to stop rioting while they were carpet bombing people in Vietnam. And that same hypocrisy is at the root of our society today, and it plays itself out in dysfunctional ways between people. And how do we address that is through politics and organizing. It's long, it's slow, in some ways it's a very unsatisfying answer, but the answer of instant gratification that comes with just casting people aside, and I know you're not saying that, but there is a problem in our movement culture that if you don't think like us, if you don't talk like us, if you're not like us, then be cast aside. But the problem is
those of us who do think like that, we can't take our 10 friends to change those dynamics that I talked about earlier. There aren't enough of us. So that means that we don't really have a choice except to engage. And it doesn't mean that you can engage with everyone, because, I'm not trying to break bread or, talk with neo-Nazis to try to understand that, but that's not what most people are. And the brothers that you're talking about are, Naomi Klein's got a new book called Doppelganger, which is looking at the ways that some aspects of the right look like some aspects of the left. And one of the things that she talks about is this and that, right? That you can be one thing, but you can also be another. That there are multiple things that are going on at one time, which speaks to, it's complicated and it's nuanced. And we have to have organization that is steeped in history, politics, and culture to be able to engage with people. And we don't have that now. And that's a problem. And that's how you can have the high point of 2020 just whittle and fritter away. Because we don't have the kinds of institutional and organizational support to help us engage with people. And that is part of the work. And that is part of what we have to do. And it can be unsatisfying. But there's no shortcut. There's no shortcut to social transformation. And these are the steps that we have to go through, I believe, in order to try to get at that. And I'm going to say one quick thing. You asked earlier about what the men can do. Okay, so this is just a quick thing. Sometimes you just have to shut up and do it, right? And so Eddie was the chair, the chair of the department I went to at Princeton African American Studies when I first got there. Eddie very well could have been like, what's this Black Lives Matter shit? What? No, you need to write some horrible academic book that no one will read, but that checks off a list. Eddie was just like, be you. Write what you want to write. Do what you want to do, right? And so sometimes you need somebody to just, just do it. Get out of your way. And so that, when you're in a position to do that, right, then do it.
Y'all got that, brothers? Quiet.
Ditto. Not about the last thing, but everything that you just said. And because I was thinking about this, when you think about the Combahee Collective, right? Who are they responding to? Not just simply, systems of patriarchy. They're also responding to liberal feminists.
Yes. White liberal feminists.
And they're also some people are trying to insist on sexual difference matters, class matters, right? So oftentimes we presume Black folk as some undifferentiated mass. That we're born with the same politics because we got the same color. And that's not true. And so you got brothers out here inhabiting a kind of masculinist politics. They could be Black nationalists. Have a whole different politics than some bourgeois liberal Negro who's just trying to gain access to Wall Street. Right? And so that could be very different ground or that's a very different platform in which to engage in politics. Interesting sorts of ways. So when we go back to that debate in the 90s, I hear Shahrazad Ali in my head. Y'all remember her? Yes. But I also remember the debates that people.
There was a book called Black Man's Guide to Understanding the Black Movement by Shahrazad Ali. Very popular grassroots Black nationalists. For those, some of y'all weren't born when it came out.
Shahrazad. Okay, yeah, so I'm dating myself. But I'm thinking about it though, Mark, against the backdrop of a resurgence of cultural nationalism.
Yeah.
You think about it against the backdrop of at one point Black studies and Skip Gates and Malefi Asante and the ways in which they're responding to the ascendants prior to them of these black women artists, right? Toni and Alice and all these folks, Walker and all these folks, right? So how did that debate take place, and what was being mobilized in those moments? So part of what we have to do is to understand the necessity of politics. I can't presume that just because you are a sister who claim to be feminist, that you're not really about trying to acquire power to act like white men. Just like you can't assume just because you're a brother that you by definition down with X, Y, and Z, right? We got to begin to get, I'm gonna use a phrase that Malcolm used, we got to become more politically mature and stop assuming that because we're black, that we're acting in the interest of each other. We got to do politics on the ground. And I think not only do we have to do that politics in relation to questions of class, we have to do that politics in relation to questions of white supremacy. We have to do that politics in relation to patriarchy. We have to do that politics in relation to imperialism, just to echo that politic of domination. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I want to say is to move, that's me trying to channel Belle in a specific sort of way. The second way I want to channel her is that we also got to deal with wounds. The first line in the second chapter of my new book is a question that my daddy asked me when I was 9 years old. I was playing hopscotch with Angel down the street. And I was gonna mess up every single time, because I loved Angel. So I would throw the rock, I said, show me how to do it. She threw the rock. My intention was to step on every line, to fall over, so that she could show me again. And then this is the first line of the second chapter. My dad yells to call me down. He said, "What are you, a fag or something?" And I'm in the foyer of my house, and my uncle's sitting on the couch, leaned over to start laughing and smiling at me. And my dad has got that look on his face that used to scare the shit out of me. And there in my father's house, at the age of 9, my manhood was being questioned. Now I make a journey to black nationalism, trying to find, right, an appropriate love. You see? So we can talk about the politics of domination, what it means to do politics, but you got a lot of wounded brothers out there. And I'm not trying to say it's your responsibility to deal with the wounds, but if we're gonna do that organizing, to do the organizing that Ms. Ella Baker called us to do, if we're gonna do that organizing, we've got to deal with the human beings right in front of us. And so, like Belle said, how do we create the space under which I can love myself in a way that is not wounded, that's not a wounded love, right? Cornell used to say this all the time, and I think he was saying it to himself. We all have a choice, because we're all wounded. We have a choice, either we're gonna be wounded healers or wounded hurters. How do we create the space? And this is me trying to answer your question. So we got the politics of it all, but that Belle is constantly telling us to get to that intimate space, right? That intimate space whereby we can create the conditions under which we can do that intimate hard work to create the better world that we're calling it.
So I have a question. So I'm responding to you and asking a question. Now I'm back on Brittney's side. So my work is about healing, right? It's, healing and action is our tagline. We are all wounded. And who is going to, and to your point, the education is needed, the organizing is needed. But we are not in the time period where we were in the community organizing doing the political work. I mean, part of one of the things that is also a tragedy to me right now is that we don't have the freedom schools anymore. We don't have the stuff that a lot of us grew up under the tutelage of. These kids are not, I don't want to sound like that lady, but I am. They're not reading, they're getting snapshots and quotes off the internet and think they know bell hooks and Audre Lorde and all the rest of that. They've just read a quote. So, we doing this together. What worries me is how do we pull their attention back? Because they do think that they're learning from, what do you call a circle jerk? They are gathering together and teaching each other nonsense. And I'm just trying to, how do we break through? We need the breakfast clubs and not the shade room, because I think that's COINTELPRO or some shit. But something, how do we organize? This does take an organizing effort, and I think this is where it has to get old school. We have to literally organize these efforts, right? We gotta get back on the ground. Like, we are going back into the street. My organization is going to the street this year for this work. Like, it's not off the internet and in the streets, it's all work this year, because it's not gonna work online. And that's what I know, honestly. I'm doing it because that's what I know. I can't do the internet. Because quite frankly, I have defended the whole white woman thing forever, and I try to be nice, and at this point, if people don't believe that I work for black people, I just gotta go to black people and just be like, yo, I'm here.
Right.
So that's what I'm just like, I'm not confused, I'm just like, yeah, do we just get organizations? Is this the mandate? Black organizations need to get back in the street and just get into the community centers, because how else does it happen? The internet got us in a chokehold.
I want to let that question sit. I want to get some audience. I'm looking at time, and I have one more question I want to ask y'all, and I'm going to link to the question that Tarana just raised. But can we raise your hand if you think you're going to have a question? Okay, that's manageable. Okay, I don't believe y'all. It's going to be like 20 more y'all, but
Question is not statement.
right. Oh, we getting there too. I want to ask that if you do have a question, the issues of the mics are short. Maybe if we can make a line for questions, if people feel comfortable standing. If you don't feel comfortable standing, just let someone from our team know, and we'll hold your place. But if you could just stand maybe on that aisle there, right against that. Brother, can you stand up for a minute? Right next to him. Right, the aisle right next to that brother right there. Thank you so much. I saw 5 hands. I started seeing. Oh, don't even work. Yeah. So, you know what? I'm going to go to questions. I'm going to ask the person to shout the question. I'm going to repeat the question on the microphone so that you can hear it through the microphone. I'm going to trust that the questions will be sufficiently brief such that I can make the translation process efficient. Yeah, it's all sisters up here, so I'm not going to give y'all are good to ask a question. Brothers, I have to give a whole other thing. So, Asantua, I'm sorry. I'm used to you being first. Okay, the sister right here has a question.
I guess my question is, in engaging, as you said, the circle jerk, in engaging the circle jerk and in young people, what would it look like to try to interject the kind of active thinking practice of the interpersonal, emotional integrity of struggle? What would it look like to take the text, to take the history, to take the culture, to take that political theoretic, and to put it in those spaces? Like, what does it look like to take that Black cultural radical political tradition and put it in those spaces? And make it accessible, because that's what Bell Hooks does, and that's where the kids are now. That's where we are.
Right. So how do we take those ideas, those questions, those histories, those texts, and literally put them in the places where we're trying to have those engagements?
Because it's just an extension of her legacy.
Because it's
making it
extension-
more accessible.
To make them more accessible. That completely makes sense to me. And it seems to be in line with what I hear Keeanga saying, what I hear Tarana saying.
It's not on YouTube.
Right. You said not on YouTube. Yeah, I'm a little uneasy with YouTube too. Because I'm thinking about Black study in general. Like, what does it mean to do political education, political organizing in real life, on the ground, in person? But also, if it is online, because I don't want to be that person that's like, get off my lawn, like, no YouTube for this stuff. Although I feel that way. How do we engage those texts in social media platforms or in other digital spaces in ways that honor the integrity of the text, so that we don't think we read a sonnet because we got one quote. We don't think we read, bell hooks because we know one line, but that we actually, or Baldwin, that's probably the best example. But we actually read this stuff. How do we do that? And I'm going to ask for the stage, maybe one or two people answer that question.
I mean, look, I am an optimist by nature, but the frustration that I have is one that I saw Tarana getting at, which is that many of us have been doing that work in the tradition of bell hooks. Marc opened a bookstore. Me and my girls had a blog. Then we had, that was widely read, and have taken the same risk as Keeanga in saying, we aren't going to write books that you will never see because they're at the university library. We're going to write books that you can pick up if you go to the bookstore. And then we are on social media and we are trying to engage. And in those spaces, the challenge that you have is that you're battling an algorithm that privileges the worst forms of engagement with people. But the other thing you have too, there was an unfortunate year that I spent as a middle school teacher. Before I went to graduate school. It wasn't the kids, it was probably me, but it was an unfortunate year for us all. The principal of my school told me on my first day, make them trust you and then you can teach them. And it's an idea that I live by, that you can't be in community and you can't share and you can't move people that don't trust you. And the problem that we have is that we're in an information ecosystem that continues to sow distrust. It's not that there's not voluminous amounts of work. People are putting out work everywhere. We're in the most dynamic production of work that I've ever seen, whether you're talking about creatively, you're talking about publishing, you're talking about video. You've got brilliant creators because of the democratization of the internet making things available, but what we don't have is a lot of trust. And so folks only want to hear the people who tell them the thing that sounds like the thing that they want to hear. And so, I think that we've got to have, so here, this is the other point of that. And so Keeanga said this thing, I've also been reading Naomi Klein's book, and the thing about how the left and the right very often engage in the same tactics. It's dogmatism, it is sinner and saint politics, right? You have to be morally pure or we excommunicate you. And the thing is, on the left, we think that look, I will not relitigate past political discussions, but what I will say is that we can be people committed to struggle across a range of political identities, and at the same time, we also have to figure out how in community to help people to really understand what the urgency of the moment is and what it demands of us. And sometimes when I have simply said to people like, yo, I see I am a radical. Like, I do not think this system is built to win. I think it has to be overturned. I think we need full transformation. But I'm a vote for the person that's not Trump because he's a fascist and this is violent, right? The levels of like, you ain't radical. But the thing is, that comes from the left. That's not from our enemies, right? That's from people who I'm in rooms with, I've been in movements with, I've been in struggle with, and they're like, you're a traitor to the movement. And the thing we don't recognize is, why would anybody want to be a part of what we're doing if we don't have an ethics of how to engage each other across difference? And so, because Bell Hooks was very radical, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy is her formulation. She never broke it apart, but she also had this clear commitment commitment and love to say, what we have to do is to be able to translate the thing that she taught me, that I try to reproduce in my work, that I think you can reproduce in your work, is that you have to respect your audience.
That's right.
And that means that you don't dumb down for them. That means that we can hold complexity. And it means also, though, that what we have to do is give each other the benefit of the doubt sometimes.
Yes.
And I feel like that is not happening. And so to Eddie's point, what you have is a bunch of wounded folks, right? What you hear from me today is my woundedness and my tiredness at trying to be in the middle of the battle. I ain't no ways tired on one hand, and on the other hand, right, it is this battle of how do you get people to listen when one of the ways that they assert power is by saying, if we both on the internet together, and we both on Twitter together, and we both in these comments together, then there's nothing that you have to teach me because we are equal. We do not trust, so black people in our generation and a couple generations before was like, these people try to keep us out of schools. And our community said, go to school, baby, get your education, baby, do this thing so that you can help our people. And the minute we got the education, our people said, don't come back here thinking you know more than us. And so I'm trying to figure out how you can do politics and the thing is, and that is part of what Bell Hooks is writing against. She's writing against this anti-intellectual strain. She's saying, intellectualism is not the performance of theory and esoterica that people can't understand. That's not intellectual, that's just performance. But intellectual is the ideas are rich enough and you're good enough because you've thought about it enough that you can make it accessible to people. Right? And so there are those of us who are in the struggle and who are trying to actually build institutions. So we're working on a project at Rutgers to try to make things more accessible, to try to combat some of this stuff, right? We're trying to, but we cannot do that if everyone is resentful because of the institutions that wall us out. And some of us are saying, we know these institutions ain't about da-da, as my mama would have said it. They about nothing. And so we're trying to abscond with institutional resources to support the people. But in order to believe us, in order to see that, you gotta give people some trust, and then we've gotta be committed to earning it. Now, I feel like the folks on this stage are committed to earning that trust. And I feel like part of what we've got to figure out is what we do to rebuild the community's trust. And that's not just about the people not trusting us. That's also because we live in a society that is very invested in us not being able to see and trust each other.
I'm just adding one little piece to what she said about that dogmatic nature and back to revolutionary grace. And part of what that thinking is I don't believe in this politic of liberation that we have without a politic of grace. And that is, what does it look like when we get to a movement vote, right? When we get to this utopia that we're supposed to be fighting for, this place of liberation, when we look back at how we fought. And how do we expect people to follow us when they look at how we're fighting and we can't not even get along, because we don't all have to get along, but we do have to respect each other. And we do have to build what trust looks like. And that's why I think this other thing has built, not just the incels, but it's another level. There's the incels, which I think is high. But then there are the people who believe the YouTubers and the Instagram folks who are just putting out random bad history, bad information, who are synthesizing news for people, who are synthesizing historical moments and things like that. And they're believing them, and they're not, the sister sat down, but,
Right there.
oh, hey girl. So, I can't see it. But they're listening to them instead of listening to those of us who are putting out good information because they come off not high and mighty, for lack of a better way to put it. In the information, they're watching us. They're watching us all the time, and we don't operate. Revolutionary grace is about having grace with a political analysis, right? With a power analysis. And so I just think we have to think about that more when we operate, because we operate, some of us, again, I think not these folks, from this place that says, I know more than you, but follow me. And we don't have grace with each other. We don't have grace with the people inside of our community. We have all of this judgment you know, people, I'll take the Keeanga situation that happened recently. People who do the work that I do, who refuse to say anything about what happened to Keeanga. Like,
You know when the person forcibly...
the person who forcibly kissed, when she got forcibly assaulted in front of everybody. You see statements coming out about how horrific that was. So there's that little bit of judgment. People notice that. People see that. So anyway, I think until we make those kind of changes on our end, we can put out all the information we want. We can put out all the whatever we want. People are not going to come to it.
Absolutely. I want to manage the expectations of people in the back of that line. Yeah. What I'm going to do...
We'll be more succinct.
Is going to act... Even still, my dear brother, it's probably not going to happen. But why don't we take the next 3 questions, and we have about 8 minutes, so we're going to take the next 3 questions and see where we are with that. So if you take the questions in a row, starting with the time, we'll go straight to 1, 2, 3.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Asantwa Nkrumah Toure. I'm a member of an organization called the Justice for Angel Davis Now campaign. I want to thank our panelists, but I'm kind of directing this to Tarana. Tarana, I need you to pray for me, sis. Because Angel Davis was shot twice in the head by a young black man named Lamont Daniels back in March. And 6 months before he shot her as a landlord terrorist officer doing an eviction, he was facing eviction himself. When Latif Mathia was shot during eviction in
So we do have to get the question, only because we have 7 minutes, so we'll put us out.
My pointer is, Latif Mathia was shot in front of her daughter. Her landlord is a women's nonprofit formed in the 1960s and 70s to provide housing for low-income women. And they called the LTO on her to do an eviction knowing she had 3 children in the house.
Okay.
So for these people who are supposed to be whatever, we got a women's nonprofit, and we got a young black man who was facing eviction himself doing these violent evictions.
You know what?
We are.
Wait for me, Elsa. Let me step to the side. I'm gonna talk to you separately.
I want y'all to write, and let's get to these...
So we can get to the questions.
The
Step
3
to the
questions,
side. Let me
yeah,
talk to you separately.
I'm going to repeat it, so...
We talked a lot today about, first of all, thank you all for coming. You all are idols for me and have really informed my own education. And we talked a lot about the intersections of race and gender, but I wanted to bring to the forefront disability as well. So we talked about the ways that these digital spaces are not only conducive to organizing, but when we think about the literature, Bell Hooks is accessible to an extent, but the average reading level is 8th grade level. Fifth grade in Philadelphia. So she's still not accessible to the greater community that we're trying to work with. So as we think about these organizing practices and as we're continuing to see libraries and education come under attack, how do we organize without an expectation of a certain level of literacy and make space for disability when it comes to developmental disability?
Good question. I'm going to take this question right here, and then get some responses, and then we'll jump to the next.
Hi, y'all. Good afternoon. Happy to see another review up here. My thing is like, what do we do? All of you. My question is like, what do you do with the title? Like Tarana and Brittney have both said that they are tired, and I am tired. I have organized in Philadelphia for a very long time. I've organized on the numerous fronts. I ran No Name Books with No Name for 2 years, right, where we were reaching adults even through the pandemic. I now work with young people outside of school, so I'm what they call an out-of-school time programmer. But I'm tired. Like, I am actually exhausted. I raised $40,000 during the pandemic and got no smoke. Nobody said thank you, and I didn't need to thank you. But like, what do you do with the tiredness when you live at the intersection?
That's a wonderful question. Seriously, thank you. That's a wonderful question.
When you live at the intersection.
Let's linger with those 2. Yeah, try to engage those questions.
I'm gonna start with the second one first. Stop. I'm gonna tell you, this will be really succinct. And I use this all the time. When Toni Morrison was here, I forgot the year, I got a chance to escort her around and talk to her. And I have this on video, I use it all the time. Some kids interviewed her, and my child was one of them, and asked a question about writer's block. And they asked, you know, what do you do when you can't write and you have writer's block? How do you push through it? And she said, you don't. She said, if you're blocked, it's because you're supposed to, you're meant to be blocked. And all the people were like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And she said, respect the pause. And I use that all the time. Here's the thing about us in particular. We complain about having the cape on our back and and doing everything and trying to be superwomen, but we push through all the time. Now I'm gonna say this and everybody's gonna say, oh my God, but I wrote about this publicly. I had a stroke in July of 2020. And after I had the stroke, I wrote about it, I talked about it, and I said, I'm no longer gonna be superwoman. I'm gonna take a rest and I'm gonna be stressed, you know, rearrange my life and blah, 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 because y'all not gonna kill me. And then I was hospitalized for 9 days in January of 2022, because I lied. But I'm not lying anymore. This work is gonna be here. The work is gonna be here. And it's not your job to carry it on your shoulder. So if you're tired, sit down. Take a rest, let somebody else do it. And sis, I got your paper. So, oh, I got you.
Yeah, I think it's really important to the other question to think about. I think one of the reasons why I'm not as dismissive of online and digital spaces is precisely because they allow people to organize. I've heard, I remember even in like 2014, 2015, when people would say, that ain't real activism, that ain't real organizing, we're doing online. I'm like, not only is that inaccurate, not only is it historically so imprecise when you think about what social media has meant in different social moments and certain historical structures, but it's also ableist, right? To think about the type of important organizing. And I'm not just talking about changing your avatar, the kind of symbolic cultural politics that was happening. I'm talking about people organizing meetups, people doing letter writing campaigns, people doing positive forms of doxing. There's a lot of stuff that happens. Actually, we wrote about it in See the Nuncy, my newest book. Second chapter. But I do think that's important. I agree that part of the appeal of YouTube is that it's compelling and that you can access it, you can understand it, you can replay it, you can do things that you can't do in a university lecture or maybe even in a really dense book. So I think part of what it means is we have to occupy those spaces. We have to create our own digital spaces that counter-narrate what's happening and push back against some of those algorithms. Those algorithms are driven by profit. So if we can create space and desire and demand rather for those things, I think it can be better. And then also I think readers, and I think Bell Hooks would say this, readers also have a responsibility, right? They have a responsibility to look up words, they have a responsibility to understand concepts. Doesn't mean we talk so over the head that it's impossible, but we also don't, as the church said, we love you where you are, but we love you too much to leave you that way. I think that's what accessible scholarship should be doing as well. We got time for
One quick thing.
these two, real quick. I'm gonna let Eddie and Keeanga take them, so I hope they're in their line.
Just one quick thing. I also think we have to do both because we need to be together. And that part of the problem is when we're not in the same room together, then, you know, people have forgotten how to actually engage with each other. So we have to figure out, you know, there's no going back to the way things used to be, right? So we have to figure out how the digital aspect of this, but also we need to be in rooms together and to be able to look at each other and, you know, talk to each other.
I agree 1,000%. Yes.
So my question is actually segueing into what you just spoke about, the comment you just made. So as an educator, a poet, a broadcaster, how do we get teachers? How do we get our communities? How do we get the children into forums like this that they're hearing everything that we've heard today? How do we open up those avenues of interest? How do we actually segue so the masses are in agreement with, well, not agreement per se, but agreement of coming to listen, to make a change, to be active?
Yeah.
Because we've been sitting for too long.
That's a wonderful question. We're going to take this last question right here.
So, hi, my name is Keeanga Yamahtta-Taylor. I am with It Takes a Village Foundation. And to follow up with Sister's question right there, it's like I work with high school students, and my biggest thing is that they're bored. You can tell they're bored. And how do you get them to be more interested, especially when it comes to mental health? Because a lot of what you were saying about the healing and all of that stuff, I mean, it starts
marketing board.
It's hard. These are the similar kinds of questions about what do we do and how do we do it. And, I think that there are two ways to think about this. One is people do plug away. They create organized spaces. This thing here today was organized. There are meetings that happen in some capacity or other like this. I know I'm a author with Haymarket Books that does lots of forums like this online as well. So there are spaces where these are created. But I do think that this is not the kind of thing where we will just plug away and plug away and plug away until we eventually change things, or that through our own individual dedication, that alone will transform the situation. There are times when things move at an incremental pace, and then there are things that happen that dramatically move things forward or have the potential to exponentially. And so for me, I'm interested in what kinds of things have we created and built so that when those moments arrive, that we pull people who are interested in more than just showing up for one thing or coming out to a particular thing, and help to turn people into not passive observers, but to active participants in changing and being much more engaged and see themselves as going out and also being able to talk to people. And so we had an opportunity like that, right? How do we get people involved? That's what 2020, in a very dramatic way, was. And that was its own thing, but this was like 10 years of Black Lives Matter, with huge protests and mobilizations and all that sort of thing. And part of what has been missing is, where do people go after that? What do people do after that? And so for me, I am interested in how do we build organizations that are able to sustain us from the high moments of struggle through the low moments of struggle to the return of high moments, which are coming. Because our politics are so broken that people can't get the things they need realized through conventional modes of change. Like, our government literally is not a metaphor, it's broken. It doesn't work. It will be shut down in a couple of days. And so it means that people want things to happen and they don't happen, and the pressure builds up in our society and then it explodes. This is the pattern of politics in this country. And the lack of organization is also part of a pattern in this country, so that we aren't able to generalize from one struggle to the next. And so, again, there's no shortcut. It can feel unsatisfying, but we have to build our way out of this mess, and there's no quick fix to that.
Can I add something real quick? Because I think that's entirely correct, but let me say this thing, and I say this with a clear sort of place from which I say it. I grew up in the Black church. I am a daughter of the Black church, and I understand the violence of the church, and I ain't telling y'all to go to church, but I am bringing up the example of the church, because what it was is a sustained Black institution. Through hell and high water, people showed up, and the thing I love about the church, despite some of my disagreements with it, is that it was one of the institutions where Black people showed up every week to think about their social condition, to think about their spiritual condition, to actually get the language to describe what they were going through. Now, we don't have to agree with the language they got, but what I'm saying to you is join institutions and build institutions. And so this is why I think Uncle Bobbie's matters. This is why I think it's one of the, I've been reading Marc for many years, but it's one of the most brilliant moves that I see, because it understands something fundamental fundamental. People do need a place to gather, and they do need a place that is where the ideas are part of the soul of the place. So when you walk in, you feel like this is a place where I'm going to go to be able to engage ideas. And so we keep wanting some kind of like, well, if we could just get everybody to come to these seminars, that's not, the traditions of Black organizing have happened in Black institutions. And when we say, well, who has done it before? The women I studied in the early 20th century built a whole civil society at the height of Jim Crow. The club women, they built hospitals, they built schools, they built churches, they built old folks homes, they built homes for the people migrating so that they wouldn't get caught up in street work, right, that was dangerous for women. We have a tradition of building Black institutions, and they don't have to be flashy, and they don't have to have a lot of money. And the thing that we have to then do, and so let me say one more thing that will be unpopular, but I do think is true, and I do think is important. Part of the reason we can't build institutions now is because folks think that, like social media, institutions are supposed to be as nimble as social media, that you're supposed to be able to turn on a dime. But the thing that makes institutions work is that they're steady. They don't go fast. They don't turn quickly. And so some of my colleagues in this work who have built institutions keep on telling me how sisters that I have been in the game, in the struggle, like Tarana, right? Tarana didn't tell me this, but sisters who have been in the trenches doing this work, who have a radical politic, a disability-inclusive politic, a politic that's inclusive of trans folks, gender non-binary folks, folks with disabilities, right? Something I know we didn't talk a lot about today, but that you can't talk about a radical feminist politic without acknowledging. Those sisters are telling me that they're tired, and some of the tiredness is not from the right-wing enemies, it's not from white folks, some of it is from young people who are telling them that their work doesn't matter, telling them that they're violent, telling them that look, let me tell you something. And I'm saying this because I was a young upstart. I talk super crazy to people. I understand that I respect young people. I am thankful for the way that you have been in the streets. I am thankful for your contributions. I have literally signed up to get old while my students stay the same age and all of them between 18 and 22. And that is the job I have signed up for because I love working with that age group, because they inspire me and because we need them. So I do not want you to hear this as a disrespect of your experience, your position, or what you have to bring. But the people who make it possible for me to walk into Rutgers every day and look at white folks and deal with them and deal with their shenanigans are church ladies who dealt with indignities that I never dealt with. Now, baby, sometimes them folks, they don't always know your pronouns, and they should, and you deserve them. But what they will do is stand in the face of folks that want to deny your dignity and fight for you. On your behalf. And I will say to them that you have to do better, and you got to get this baby's pronouns right, and you got to evolve in your thinking about sexuality, because some of y'all queer too, and you just mad. So I want you to know that I see you, but I also see y'all. My best friend, Dr. Melanie Price, is in the audience, and one of the things that she runs the Center for Race and Justice at Prairie View A&M University in Texas. She is in the middle of the struggle. Texas, okay? She's in the struggle. And the thing she has said to me that has helped me, she says sometimes these young people that we work with, that we sacrifice for, that we fight for, they give those of us who are trying to get it right more hell than the people that have written them off. And so some of the reasons that y'all don't go to these institutions where you have to be in intergenerational conversation, or you have to talk to 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds, is because they don't always understand the way that you're showing up. But you don't understand them either. And part of the challenge is, y'all, we have to have institutions. We got to have bookstores, we got to have churches, we got to have mosques, we got to have just community organizations, because those are the places where you can show up and you can struggle together. And so I go to a radical church here in Philly, and I go there.
Yes, Leslie Callahan.
Leslie Callahan, St. Paul's over in North Philly. And I go there because most of the people that turn the lights on and get the service running, they don't know half of the jargon here. But they love Black people. And they believe in the fundamental dignity of coming together to engage in a project together, however we define that project. And so I am gonna put in a pitch in this very digital era for us to return to institutions and to return with a sense of revolutionary grace that says that everybody don't have to see. Look, me and Keeanga have been on panels together forever. Keeanga is the most radical sister I know out here, and she radical talked about it. And sometimes I'd be like, ooh, I got to work on this some more because I'm like kind of liberal about this point, and okay. But let me tell you something, but this sister is the most respectful, kind, generous sister because it is about struggle and about revolution. And I always believe when I'm with Keeanga that even in the places where we disagree about politics, which really means the places where my politics have to evolve, right? I believe that she loves me and she loves us and she's fighting for us, and that allows us to sit in that place of disagreement. And so y'all gotta learn how to be in spaces with people who disagree with you. And you can quote Baldwin all day about how your dignity shouldn't be whatever, but when we were talking about not throwing black men away, my cousin, who, look, I've been personal, but the personal is political, so I wanna show you what not throwing people away is. The day before the cops broke into Breonna Taylor's home and killed her with a no-knock warrant, the home I grew up in, my mama's house, that she bought as a single mama raising me and paid for with her secretarial salary for most of my life, she lent it to my cousin who has a drug addiction. And he turned it into a crack house. And so the cops busted in, the day before it happened to Breonna Taylor, the cops busted up my mama's house on a no-knock warrant. Now, my mama died earlier this year, and my cousin got locked up on a 12-year federal bid. And you know I'm mad. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick up the phone when he calls me from federal prison, and I'm gonna keep putting money on his books because he belongs to us. Because we share a last name. So don't talk to us about who we throwing away and not throwing away. It's real material struggle because I understand the forces that placed him in the position that he was in to make those choices. Am I hurt? Am I mad? Yes. But I will not throw him away, and I will not throw any brother away, right? I will not throw any brother away unless that brother, as long as he ain't trying to kill me, right? And that, but you know what? But my capacity to do that is because I was in black institutions my whole life, black churches, black colleges, black beauty shops, black barber shops. If you don't know what black institution to go to the barber shop and organize them. It's just brothers at the barber shop every week, talk to the barber and be like, can we have some community, put your Jay-Z on and organize at the barber shop. That's it, y'all. Black institutions, revolutionary.
That's gonna have to be the last word. Family, woo! The doors of the church are open. Listen, before you go, I need one more minute of your time. First of all, this group of panelists, who I all consider friends, gave so generously of their time. We're a community bookstore, we don't pay nobody. I mean, we pay our employees, we don't pay nobody. We don't pay them. And they've all given so generously of their time. I called them, they said yes, just like that. These are all very busy, important, brilliant people. So I want all of us to give them a round of applause. You all deserve so much more. The last thing I want to thank Justin Moore. I want to thank Avisa Gallman. I want to thank my entire Uncle Bobbie staff. This does not happen because of me, it happens because of them. Give them a round of applause, please. I want to thank our friends and our partners at WHYY for joining our community event. We have much more coming up. The partnership is growing and building. We're very grateful for them. And then the last thing I want to say is we thank you all for buying every book in this room. It's been amazing. We sold out. We're grateful. But we have a whole store around the corner. today and every day that you can to go into the store. Again, I didn't open a bookstore to get rich, I promise you. This is not the key. We stay open when you support us. We stay open when you go in and you buy one book, one sandwich, one cup of coffee, whatever it is, and to make it part of our daily practice. We'll never, actually, no, definitely sweet potato pie. We will never beat Amazon at prices. Every time you go in there and buy a book from us instead of Amazon, it's a political choice. It's an investment in us. So I need you to understand that. We need you to do that. And if you don't have time, or you're so inclined, you can also just make a donation to Uncle Bobbie's. Everybody got the Cash App. Our Cash App is Uncle Bobbie's. UNCLEBOBBIES. So you can open up your phone right now. If you just want to give $1, you want to give $5, whatever it is, I don't get none of it, I promise you. It all goes to programming, it goes to community books for children, it goes to reading, it goes to being able to do all of these events without ever charging anybody anything. If you don't got it, I don't want it. But if you have anything, I would ask you to give what you can, okay? Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you. Green Street friends, thank you so much for giving us some space. So generous, we love you. We're glad to be in partnership with you. Have a good afternoon. Enjoy your day.